Hi everyone, and welcome to a slightly different part of my living room for this special series I am doing to finish out the year here at TFD. So I love doing our video essays. They're very fun. They're fun to research and write and interview for, but I also sometimes miss doing the more practical TFD videos that are all about ways that we can live better through a financially holistic lens. For those who don't know, I am 35 years old, which puts me smack in the middle of my 30s, and I honestly have loved my 30s so far. They feel like a marked improvement on my 20s, which were touch and go for a lot of reasons, but it's an age where I'm really starting to feel like myself. I think in some ways your 30s are kind of your first real years of adulthood because a lot of times your 20s feel like just figuring things out / exiting being a kid. At least for me they were. Often we don't have enough money or experience or the right people around us or the right living situations to decide who we want to be. And for a lot of us, the 30s are our first years where we can really start exercising some agency and some autonomy. It's the first time for a lot of us that we have a little bit of disposable income or savings. Or maybe we're getting into the right relationships or finding the right friends. We're settling into our careers. And even if we're not killing it on those fronts, we probably have a slightly better sense of self than we did in the past. But a lot of the advice, I think, around our 30s, especially big ages like 30, 35, 40, etc., are, I think, extremely binary, especially when it comes to money. There's this idea that you need to have a certain amount saved, or you need to own a home, or you need to be making a certain amount. I mean, obviously, as you can see by these headlines, it's a pretty common theme in the personal finance world. So I wanted to create this series all about navigating your 30s with style and financial grace as a way to share practical advice while also holding space for the fact that our 30s can look totally different, especially on a financial level. Also, this series is being made entirely in partnership with advisor.com. Now, I have personally been working with a financial advisor for several years now, and I can say without a doubt that it has changed my life for the better. Working with a financial advisor isn't just about helping you figure out your investment strategy or your savings goals. It's also literally finding someone who can help you plan out your life the way you want to live it and work backwards from your goals to build a financial strategy that helps you get there. And for a very long time, financial advisory was something that was only really available to people who already were earning a lot of money or had a high net worth. But advisor.com has a really cool model. It's a low, flat, fixed annual fee. It's totally transparent. And their advisors work for you rather than for commissions. So this whole series is going to be in partnership with advisor.com. And if you want to learn more about them, we are offering an exclusive discount for the TFD community, $500 off of your first year, which you can claim by clicking the link in our description. But anyway, with all that said, let's jump into our first video in our 30-something series here at TFD, the do's and don'ts of turning 30. The first do is take a friendship inventory. So I think one of the defining aspects of our 30s for a lot of us is really changing the way that we relate to people. And a lot of us in our 30s kind of wake up one day and look around us and see that for one reason or another, the relationships that we have are not serving us or maybe not even existent in the way that we want them to be. And it is an extremely common thing for young adults to feel like making friends is really difficult, and that we just had so many more friends when we were younger. And this is really common. Quote, although over 60% of Americans consider having close friends crucial for a fulfilling life, 8% of people 18 and older report having no close friends. And as we get older, our social circle starts to diminish. One study found that people generally have the most friends at age 25. After that, we're in a gradual friend decline for the rest of our lives. And this is not necessarily a bad thing. For example, a lot of times we have friends when we are young that are friends out of proximity. And I think a lot of us, especially a lot of us former girls, have possibly been in friend groups that were more toxic than constructive. But there is an actual loneliness epidemic happening here in the US, especially as people age. And it's not in our heads that it's harder to make friends as we get older. I also think, especially for younger generations, and I'm sorry to be the millennial talking about Gen Z this way, but it is something that I've noticed, that there has been this kind of crossover from speaking openly about mental health and self-care to sometimes weaponizing this more therapeutic language to become even more hyper-individualist and to really devalue our communities and our friends in favor of whatever happens to suit us. Like, there is an abundance of content on the internet centered on things like loving to cancel plans or when plans are canceled, not wanting to show up for things, not wanting to help people move or help take them to the airport or generally do favors that for most of human history has been the fabric of society. I mean, lest we forget, it wasn't until very recently that you could just open up an app on your phone and have basically any service performed within the next hour and a half. And this devaluing of relationships as we get older, coupled with the fact that it is naturally harder to make friends when we are not in constant proximity with people. I will say, as someone who does mostly work remotely, that is one of the downsides of not being in an office. It's not just the people that you meet in the office, it's all the additional people that you will tend to meet throughout your day when you're already out and about. This is not to say we should all be going back into the office. I'm just saying we need to find proactive ways to make up the social activity that we would otherwise be having. Because, quote, a review of 38 studies found that adult friendships, especially high-quality ones that provide social support and companionship, significantly predict well-being and can protect against mental health issues such as depression and anxiety, and those benefits persist across lifespan. People with no friends or poor quality friendships are twice as likely to die prematurely, according to Holt-Lundstad's meta-analysis of more than 308,000 people, a risk factor even greater than the effects of smoking 20 cigarettes per day. So what is a friendship inventory? In my view, it is twofold. One is a series of questions that you ask yourself. For example, am I prioritizing meeting people? Am I making the effort to pursue friendships? Am I intentionally seeking out people who share my interests and lifestyle? Am I treating my friends with respect and care? Am I being accountable to the things that I agree to? Am I a present and caring friend? And on the flip side, are my friends present and caring for me? Are they taking an interest in my life? Are they showing up for me? Or am I the one who is constantly having to initiate conversation or plans? Are they enriching my life? Are they helping me become more the person I want to be? Because ultimately, we are in many ways defined by our social groups. We will become more like the people we spend the most time with. And in a society where we tend to put a really unsustainable level of pressure on our romantic partner to be everything to us, our partner, our spouse, our best friend, it's so important to diversify the kinds of love and affirmation and quality time we are getting throughout all of the other relationships in our life. So starting your 30s by doing a full inventory of the role friendships play in your life and how you are showing up for them is a really good way to start. But on the flip side, our first don't conflate familiarity with happiness. So one thing that we should never underestimate in life, especially as we move through adulthood, and this is very relevant to things like friendships, but it can also apply to our jobs, our romantic relationships, even the cities we're living in, is how much familiarity can keep us in situations that aren't serving us. I'll throw to myself on the topic.
3 things I know at 35 that I wish I knew at 25. Number 1, never underestimate the power of inertia to keep you in the wrong situation. Our brains love what is familiar and are terrified of what isn't. And we will go to great lengths to justify staying in the wrong situation to ourselves because it's comfortable. We will stay in the wrong job, in the wrong city, in the wrong friend group, even in the wrong marriage because of inertia. So do everything in your power to fight that instinct to go for what is actually right for you.
Now, I will say that there can be serious benefits to familiarity. As one article puts it, quote, on the plus side, familiarity gives us confidence in relationships and situations we've encountered before, boosts our efficiency and performance with routine tasks, minimizes distractions and annoyances, and generally makes us feel comfortable, more relaxed, and secure. Thanks to biological familiarity, we eventually don't notice a bad smell or an annoying noise if it's consistently present for a long period of time. And thank goodness we all get more comfortable with routine places, situations, and relationships, so we don't remain as nervous and inefficient at our jobs as we did on the first day of employment. As a vital coping mechanism, familiarity can lower our heart rates and our stress levels. But familiarity can often lock us into situations that are bad for us, because we are literally wired to avoid the unknown, and to be more afraid of that unknown than even a bad situation that we're already familiar with. And in some ways, when it comes to things like a bad job, there can even be a weird addiction to familiar disappointments and frustrations, especially if you're commiserating with other employees. It can be a really, really strong bonding mechanism. And I say that as someone who has some of my closest friends to this day from a former incredibly toxic job where we basically on a daily basis went to a happy hour and bitched about how bad that job was. And to go back to the friends point, when you're doing your friend inventory, it's important to remember that just because a friend has been in your life for a long time doesn't mean they are necessarily most suited to the person you are today. It's obviously good to have friends from all eras of your life, to keep connections with your former self, and to, frankly, not just throw people away once you change or evolve. But sometimes when we are constantly surrounding ourselves with people from another era of our life, it can hold us back from becoming the person that we more want to be, because they can have that same level of familiarity. They don't want you to change. It's important in relationships to have a nice balance between people who know you and people who are just getting to know you, and to know the difference between someone who is evolving along with you and someone who expects you to remain stagnant. And speaking of audits, our second do is do audit your income. So one thing that's very important to learn financially once you get past the basics of creating and sticking to a budget, automating your savings, and doing other good financial hygiene is that it's a lot easier to earn more money at a certain point than it is to keep cutting back. And it's also very human to prefer the latter to the former, because at a certain point, it's extremely demoralizing to feel like you're constantly having to deny yourself the things that you enjoy. And when it comes to our careers, this toxic familiarity can often manifest in us getting paid vastly less than what we would be getting paid at another job. If you think about it logically, if you start at a company when you are in a more entry-level position, and each year your raise, assuming you're getting a raise every year, is based off of that initial salary, even if the percentages are pretty aggressive, it's likely over time going to be a lot less than if you switched to a new company where you are coming in at a different and much higher starting salary and role. And part of that familiarity also means it's very easy to go long periods of time without really proactively negotiating for yourself. And in fact, many times it's not even necessary to actually take another job, but rather to be proactive about putting yourself out there on the job market to see what you would be worth, discreetly take meetings with people like headhunters or other hiring managers. So you can come back to your employer if you do want to stay with them and be very clear about, hey, I would love to keep working here, because let's be clear, it is extremely expensive for an employer to replace a good employee as well. But I am being underpaid by X or Y amount, and I will need to get to this place in order to justify staying. Just being proactive about understanding your market value, understanding how competitive your role is compared to that at other companies, gives you so much more leverage to optimize your own income. And auditing your income is also an opportunity to think about other forms of income, like side jobs or gigs, passive income like investments, real estate, etc. And this is also a reason why working with a financial advisor can be really game-changing once you're ready to level up your finances, because it helps you think of your money more dynamically and more in terms of your life goals. So you're optimizing your savings and investments in ways you might not have thought of, and you're learning to prioritize all the different things that you want while still staying within a budget. But speaking of your finances, our next don't is don't fixate on a specific number. One thing that is so important about hitting your 30s is to disregard all of the noise out there about what you should have accomplished financially by this age. Because first of all, a lot of that stuff is being pushed by people who just straight up grew up in a completely different economy and have no idea what it's like financially right now for young adults. Things like wages were much more aligned with the cost of living, and all of the big important purchases that we associate with coming into adulthood, like our educations, our homes, etc., were radically less expensive. Using homes as an example, the median home price in the US in 1950 was $7,354, a stark contrast to the median price of $431,000 in 2023. This significant difference, even when adjusted for inflation, translates to a 2023 median price of around $89,000 for a 1950s home. But even if the advice that we're getting about, oh, you need to have X amount in savings, or you should own a home, or you should be debt-free, were applicable in the same way to previous generations, which it's absolutely not, let's be clear. Like, student debt as a concept basically didn't exist for our parents' generation, at least not nearly in the same way that it does for ours. But even if that were true, not everyone is starting from the same starting point financially, and it can be incredibly bad for our mental health to constantly be comparing ourselves with other people who may come from a completely different financial background. Because so much of our financial situation as adults is heavily impacted by how we grew up, our family's finances, the opportunities and access that we got in education or our early career. For example, if you had parents who were able to put you through college, you could have the exact same degree from the exact same school as someone else who is now $150,000 in debt and going for the exact same opportunities with the same starting salaries. And as someone who got herself into credit card debt and basically completely torpedoed her finances before she even started her adult life, I can tell you that having spent years just trying to get myself back to a place of normal financially, with a halfway decent credit score and a tiny bit of savings, I had to have years of making great financial choices just to get to that place. And if I were comparing myself to someone who never started out from behind like that, I would drive myself crazy. So the only person or benchmark that you should be holding yourself to when it comes to how you're doing financially is your former self. And speaking of evaluating yourself against yourself, do be honest about how you're treating your body. Now, this is a very, very touchy subject, and I definitely want to do my best here to speak compassionately and also with an acknowledgement that not everyone is working with the same level of ability or, like with finances, coming from the same starting point. This is also not to fearmonger about certain bodies, but when you look at overall health indicators for younger generations, we are seeing some pretty crisis level outcomes in our physical health. Now, there are a lot of reasons for this, right? Like, it is cheaper and easier in America to eat really calorically dense, nutritionally void foods. We have to, in many cases, go out of our way not to live a very sedentary lifestyle. We are often isolated socially, which, as we discussed, can have a huge negative impact on our physical and mental health. And things like access to basic medical care can be really prohibitively expensive. But all that being said, we have to find in our 30s, because let's be clear, if your 20s kind of don't count in terms of how you're treating your body, and I feel like that's honestly kind of debatable, but as someone who used to like go out till 3 a.m, drink like a bazillion tequila sodas, stop at a fast food place on the way home, eat like a 20-piece McNugget and fries and large Coke, wake up the next day and like go to a bottomless brunch, like I was at least living like I was on shore leave for the entirety of my 20s, or at least a good part of my 20s. And I will say that overall, I feel like I didn't have catastrophic health impacts as a result. But your 30s, I will say from experience, are a time when the choices that you are making with your body really start to be felt. And you can have that compassion and understanding of all of the context I laid out while still being honest with yourself about how you're treating your body. Are you getting the right macro and micronutrients? Are you moving enough every day? Are you building strength? Are you forming healthy relationships? Are you socializing outside of just like going to a bar? Are you including activities in your life that aren't watching TV or the dastardly scrolling on your phone while watching TV? Just like it's important to do a friendship audit in our 30s, I think it's incredibly important to start your 30s with that audit of how am I treating the body that I live in. In our increasingly digital era, it is easy to treat your body as just like this mecha suit that is completely detached from your brain and to live entirely up there, but I hate to inform myself and you that it's all one, baby. We got to treat it all as one. That being said, the next don't is don't feel old. Now, if there is one thing that kind of darks me out about Gen Z, it is how obsessed they are with anti-aging and their conflation of youthfulness/beauty and self-worth, or even moral value. Like, I can't keep hearing about how unproblematic celebrities are just because they don't have wrinkles. And as we're discussing in our October video essay, the premature skincare happening amongst Gen Z and even Gen Alpha isn't just a huge waste of money, it's also in many cases damaging their skin because it's completely unnecessary because, spoiler alert, teens and 20-somethings don't need to overload their faces with anti-aging products. But even amongst my own generation, like when I'm talking to friends sometimes or scrolling media, I see a really depressing tendency to refer to ourselves as being old. And I do think part of this is how not just youth obsessed our media is, but especially our social media is. You have to go out of your way on a lot of social media platforms, which is how a lot of us now are spending our time, to not see people who are literally in their teens and 20s. So even though by some metrics we might feel like we are an older generation, it's so important to remind ourselves that this is not the case. Because just so we're all clear, how we think of ourselves in terms of aging actually has physical health impacts on our body. Quote, the way you think about aging can also make a difference. Research shows that whether you hold negative or positive views about aging may impact health as you age. Negative beliefs about aging may increase undesirable health outcomes, Alzheimer's disease biomarkers, and cellular aging. Meanwhile, positive beliefs about aging may decrease the risk of developing dementia and obesity. And not to get all existential, but more life and more health are very much not guaranteed to us. So we should not be wasting any of our life in what is still very much a young, healthy adult body in many cases by constantly thinking and talking about how old we are. I personally feel younger at 35 than I did for a lot of my 20s, and part of that is just because I feel like I'm doing so much more with my time. And thinking about yourself as already over the hill when you're in your prime is at minimum a profound misuse of that time. And as a side note, I also believe that thinking of ourselves as so old and so removed from younger generations is part of the phenomenon that leads older people in this country to become completely politically and socially removed from younger generations and frankly the future of the planet. But that's for another video. Speaking of reframing our thinking though, my next do is do embrace expression outside of acquisition. So one thing that's financially crucial as you get older is understanding that you cannot buy your way into being a different person, and that there are many ways to express your creativity, personal style, etc. besides just purchasing things. In fact, acts like mood boarding, window shopping, going to a museum exhibit or art gallery, or other ways of surrounding yourself with desirable to you objects without necessarily purchasing them, can have huge positive effects on mental health while decoupling the idea of needing to acquire something in order to enjoy it. I must throw to my queen, Heather Hurst, aka Pig Mommy here.
I think that we have, and I have absolutely fallen prey to this in my style journey that I sort of mentioned, is that there's sort of this aura of entitlement and a feeling that it's a moral high ground, or there's a moral value to being able to own your style to express it. And if you're not expressing your style through ownership, then you don't have style. And you'll see this discourse a lot online too, with people saying, well, you don't even own these expensive shoes, so how can you be part of this fashion discussion, or how can you be commenting on that when you don't even have the money to participate? And I think that
hating from outside the club, as
as it were. My sense of style, thinking about building my personal style, again, was very wrapped up in acquiring and thinking that if I didn't own something, that meant that I didn't have that style, which is just a really silly way to operate when you think about all the other things. Like, you could have read a book without owning it and you still have that knowledge, the same way that, not to get into some sort of woo-woo thing, that if we're all naked, like, who are we really if we don't have the material ways to express ourselves? But it kind of does make you think about, like, why do I need to own these things so badly? And I've thought about that too a lot with shopping, thinking about sometimes my desire to own something can be just as informative, or rather more informative, than the process of buying it and then wearing it. Sometimes the things that I desire just says a lot about the season that I'm in, or what inspires me independent of needing to own it, and just thinking about different ways to style things that then comes from that, versus, again, purchasing something first, then having everything come after.
Now, part of leaning into this phase of appreciation, imagination, creativity, etc., is not just about removing yourself from the need to constantly be buying. It's also about optimizing for the anticipation phase of things rather than the execution, which there is really good data also that shows that that can actually bring us as much or more happiness than the event itself. Quote, the sheer number of positive emotions we experience relative to negative ones affects how happy we are generally. And for that reason, excitement about future events can be a great source of positive emotions. Studies show that positive anticipation can bring us just as much or more pleasure than the event itself. And part of this decoupling acquisition from expression or style or creativity can also make us more appreciative of what I have. I was writing in a recent newsletter about how I have been doing a ton of mood boards with my own wardrobe. Like, I uploaded pictures of items I have or went and found them online, or really similar looking ones. And I use an app called Collageable, where I basically just like make different outfit mood boards. And I try to always do like completely new combinations or things I haven't worn in a really long time. Because I think part of what is often drawing us to buy is this feeling of newness, freshness. Even just seeing something on a screen in a pretty background can make it feel more valuable than the thing we already have in our closet. So even just taking the time to reframe the things you already have through that really appreciative lens can be a total game changer. But on the flip side, my don't is don't follow any kind of social media that drives you to consume. Now, this is a fine line, right? Because basically any account that you're going to follow after a certain point, even people that you know in your personal life, are probably at some point going to do something that you are also going to want to buy or engage in. Like, I will be honest that many of my favorite restaurants, cafes, bars, etc. here in New York City are ones that I found through people I know going to on social media, because I have friends with taste. But there is a big difference between people whose lives and stories inspire you and people whose value proposition is getting you to buy things. Now, our October video essay, which is all about hyper-consumerism, really breaks down how a lot of this works, especially from a psychological perspective, where we are frequently getting ourselves onto a hamster wheel of constant consumption. But it's really important to remind ourselves just how many of the most popular accounts and creators on places like TikTok or Instagram are directly monetizing the desire to spend that they're creating in their followers. That can be things like their Amazon storefronts, brand partnerships, TikTok shops, like-to-know-its, etc. And in many cases, they're encouraging you to buy things that they themselves did not have to pay for. I saw a video the other day that like really tweaked my brain in that regard. It was on my For You page. I do not follow this person and never would. But she made this video that was like, I've been seeing these pants and I was like, I don't understand why anyone is paying for those. Those are not worth it. But then insert designer brand who makes them here sent me a free pair of those pants. And I was like, oh, whoa, I get it now. You definitely need to buy these pants with an affiliate link. Like, okay, I know that we're in the capital of the Hunger Games at all times, but there are certain times when I see things that are just so blatantly oriented toward getting people to spend money in a disingenuous way that it tweaks my brain is the only way I can say it. Suffice to say though, there are a lot of accounts like this. And once you learn the things to look for, which again, we talk about in our video essay, it is, I think, easier and easier to filter them out through your life. But especially as you get older into your 30s and you are wanting to be a lot more intentional and think long-term about your finances, think about things you want to invest in, ways you want to grow your wealth, it is crucial to be tuning out all of the noise that is constantly pushing you to spend on stuff that isn't worth it. Which brings us to our final do, which is do invest in quality whenever possible. Now, all of that being said, we can't just not buy things, whether it's clothes or home goods or food, but to whatever extent that we can, because to be clear, we are all working with different budgets, it's so important that we get ourselves off of this constant hamster wheel of over-consuming cheap, low-quality goods. Because often we end up spending more than we would have if we had bought a better item. So part of that is decoupling expression with ownership, like we discussed, but another part of it is really thinking in terms of cost per use and investing in quality when possible. With our clothes, this can look like buying higher quality items secondhand and having them tailored, or taking our shoes to the cobbler rather than buying new ones each season. I'm going to once again throw to myself here.
If you only ever take one thing from this account, let it be this. Buy your jeans too big and get them tailored. Jeans are not supposed to fit you perfectly in the dressing room. It is a very, very rare body type that will be able to pull jeans off the rack and instantly look fabulous in them. The way that jeans fit in the dressing room is purely a starting point. And no pair of designer jeans off the rack will ever look half as good as a random pair of Levi's you bought at Goodwill and had tailored to your body. And ego is always the enemy of happiness, but that's especially true when buying jeans because you need to buy one or two sizes bigger than you are in order to get this to work properly. And if you're hung up on the number in the label, you will always be held back from perfect jeans. After work today, I'm going to my tailor where for under $100, they are going to take my jeans and make them fit exactly as I want them to. And if you're expecting that to happen in a store dressing room, you will always be disappointed.
And when it comes to our home, that can mean everything from buying furniture made of superior, more durable materials from places like Facebook Marketplace or thrift markets, to investing in renovations that increase the value of your home while making it better to live in. And even when it comes to our food, being honest with ourselves about the items that end up going uneaten or which are extremely expensive and leave us feeling kind of empty. I'm looking at you overindulging in deliveries, something that I'm definitely guilty of from time to time and which inspired me to do a 100% cook from home challenge earlier this year. The point is that the more we can start thinking in terms of cost per use and in buying secondhand when possible, as well as getting things that are optimized to fit into our actual lives and our needs, the healthier those parts of our budgets will be. But all of that said, my last don't is don't conflate expensive with valuable. As we get further into adulthood and in some cases have a little bit more disposable income, we are going to be constantly targeted with expensive stuff that purports to be valuable just because it's expensive. But even if something has a good cost per use and is better for your budget, it is still not likely to be an investment in the same way that actual investments are. And we can often trick ourselves into overspending on things because they are framed with the same halo effect as actual investments. So let me say this once and for all, with very rare exception, cars are not an investment. Designer clothes and accessories are not an investment. Rental upgrades and even many upgrades in a home that you own are not investments. And I don't want any of you fashion girlies in the comments being like, well, Birkins are an investment. First of all, maybe, okay, fine, even if they are. Most people aren't out here able to spend $16,000 on a handbag in the first place. And second of all, if they did have that disposable income, they would be so much better off putting that into something like an ETF. And also, like, even if we're going to give you that one, that Birkins are a good investment, like for every one Birkin, there's like 100 different designer clothing and accessory items that are trying to market themselves as investments, even though they very much are not. I go on the real bitch. I see what that stuff is being sold for. Because here's the truth. The best investments are usually the most boring and unsexy ones. Quote, the French philosopher Blaise Pascal once wrote, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. The investor play here would be all portfolio problems stem from the investor's inability to stick with a boring asset allocation. Successful investing should be boring. It should be long-term in nature. It requires patience and discipline and the ability to ignore the madness of crowds. But you can't brag about boring to your friends and coworkers. No one writes glowing profiles about normal people who diligently save and invest their hard-earned money or keep fees to a minimum and stay the course. At the end of the day, navigating your 30s with style and grace, in my opinion, is all about knowing where to invest and knowing where to divest. That can be in your habits, in your friendships, in your career, and perhaps most crucially in your money, because ultimately creating financial stability and long-term wealth building for yourself are going to be key to allowing you to do all of the other things that are important to you. The thing about money is you kind of have to just get good with it so that you can put it out of the way and not always be focused on it. And in my opinion, again, the right financial advisor can be crucial to mastering that art. So if you are looking for a financial advisor, I highly recommend advisor.com. Again, their flat fee annual model means that they are not only more financially accessible, it means they work for you and not for commissions. And our TFD community gets an exclusive discount if you use the link in the description. Anyway, guys, I will see you back here next Sunday for the next installment of our special little end of year 30-something series. Bye, guys.